Hi everyone, this is lesson 2.3 or the beginning of lesson 2.3, the multiplication property of equality, and we're going to use this to solve equations. Alright, so when we're talking about the multiplication property, we're also talking about it includes division. And most or a lot of the ones that we're going to be working with will actually be dividing. So what this is saying, and when you look at the actual property, is that if I multiply both sides by the same number, I have equivalent equations, and that includes division. So on this first equation, this says negative 7 times x equals negative 49. So we're trying to figure out what the x would be, and we're going to do that by division. My goal is to get this to be a 1x. If I divide negative 7 by negative 7, that is 1. So that leaves me with 1x equals a positive 7. Now this one's pretty easy to check. Negative 7 times 7 equals negative 49, and that is true, so it checks. On the second equation, this really means negative 1y, right? So we're going to divide by negative 1, and that leaves us y equals negative 8. So remember, when you're solving, your variable has to be a 1x, 1y, whatever the variable might be. And so we're dividing to make that happen. Now what happens when we have a fraction here? I don't really want you to divide by 3/4 because that actually means multiplication. So we're simply going to multiply by the reciprocal of 3/4. So the reciprocal, of 3/4 is 4/3, right? You have to remember that. You just flip it. Well, if I multiply 3/4 times 4/3, I get 12 over 12, which equals 1. Therefore, I have simplified my variable when I do this to just a 1 in front of it, right? So I'm going to multiply both sides by 4/3. And as I just showed you, that leaves me a 1n. Now on the 15, I'm going to have negative 15 over 1 times 4 over 3. There's different ways you could go about this. You could say, oh, well, that's negative 60 over 3, which gives me negative 20. And so my solution is negative 20. Now, on the next one, you could look at this as multiplying by the reciprocal also, but it would make more sense if you write it this way. 1/15 d equals 2, because remember, there's an understood 1 there with your d, so we can write this as a fraction. The reciprocal of 1/15 is 15. So we multiply on both sides of our equation by 15. And that leaves me with a 1d. Remember, reciprocals always equal 1 when we multiply. And then that is equal to 30. And of course, you can check that, right? 30 divided by 15 equals 2. It checks. Alright, so before we solve this one, we have to combine the x's, right? We have 0.4 and negative 0.9x. So when we combine those, we're going to have a negative 0.5x minus 6. And so when you're dividing by decimals or when you're working with decimals, just use your calculators because that will help you figure out what's going on here. We're going to add 6 to both sides, which leaves me 25 equals negative 0.5x. And we're going to divide both sides by negative 0.5. And once again, you can just use calculators to figure this out. You don't really have to go into any of the what is happening with the division thing. So this ends up being negative 50 equals x. And if you think about this, if we split 25 into halves, we have 50 of them. And it's negative because we're dividing a positive number by a negative number. Okay, so we have to do a little extra work here because we're going to need common denominators to make this work. So 2/7 z, hold on, let me do this first. We're going to add, oh man, okay, let me put my equal sign back on there from the previous slide. Okay, we're going to add 1/5, and that gives me 2/7 z equals 1/2 plus 1/5. So we need a common denominator in order to add these two. And I'm just going to go over here to the side. My common denominator is going to be 10, right? So I'm going to multiply this by 5, right? Because 2 times 5 gives me 10, so I multiply my numerator by the same number. I'm going to multiply this one by 2/2, because that gives me a 10 in my denominator and 2 in my numerator, right? So it's 2/7 z equals 5/10 plus 2/10. So now I have 2/7 z equals 7/10. Now we're still going to solve this by multiplying on both sides by the reciprocal, okay? So I'm going to write this over here. The reciprocal is always the one with the variable. So we're going to multiply by 7/2 on both sides. That leaves me with a 1z. And then, let's see, that was 7/10. Okay, so we're going to have 49/20. And as you can see, that is going to be our solution to this equation. I just noticed my time has gone really long, so I'm going to stop and pick this up on the next video.